So welcome, we're going to get started. I just wanted to say thank you very much for everyone for coming this evening, for the students for powering through this incredibly marathon week. And for Dorothée Dupuis, thanks so much for coming here. And also thanks for the great energy all day today, and still tonight you seem perfectly fresh, so I don't know. Anyway, so welcome.
Thank you. So hi guys, thank you so much for coming. So first I would like to thank everyone at the Pacific Northwest College of Art, especially Erin for inviting me, also Alejandra and Agnes to have me at their home, as well as Erin for the organization, and probably in advance other members of the team who will make these 2 days a success. Also, thanks to the crowd present here tonight, the public, the students. The presentation will be around like 30 minutes, and there will be some questions if you have some later on. So let me introduce myself. I'm Dorothée Dupuis. I'm a French curator and publisher based in Mexico City. I'm the director of Terremoto magazine and Temblores Ediciones, and the title of the talk I will give you today is Terremoto, an editorial project as a symptom of 25 years of shuffling cards in the Americas. So, So the world has totally changed since I started Terremoto 25 years ago in 2013. At first, I was totally ignorant of even the language in which I would later make the magazine, Spanish, now the first language in USLA, US and Canada. At my arrival in Mexico City in 2012, driven by curiosity and the weird intuition that Europe and a certain conception of the West altogether was about to face a quick decline, both economic and cultural. An intuition which, as you know, revealed itself unfortunately true and terrible for Europe. In the 2010s, Mexico City was often labeled ignorantly by some as the new Berlin, and it suffices to think of Berlin's 2000 golden age in comparison to today's terrible downfall to convince oneself of the stupidity of such an analogy. Following the 1985 earthquake, Mexico City center had been devastated and some portion of it largely unoccupied for years. But it was starting to fill up again with various waves of new immigrants, both local and foreign like myself, albeit mostly from the north and the south of the Americas. They were attracted by the irresistible change of polarities within the continents, which is at the bottom the subject of this talk, beyond corporate demonstrations of power and the didactic presentation of what can be now considered among the international art press as an institution and the main reference about Pan-American contemporary art, especially after the closure of eFlux in 2028 and the purchase of Art Forum by Temblores Ediciones, our mother company, last year. It was indeed flair and also probably luck that made me randomly establish the magazine in Mexico City and not anywhere else. Since the establishment of the United States of Latin America in 2028, also what a coincidence, and the designation of Mexico City as a headquarters of its parliament, well, of course, things have moved even faster. Also making some real estate moves which would have looked quite bold at the time, highly necessary. Being the owner of our building, we can't be evicted that easily. A bit like the New York of the 70s. Or the Detroit of the 2010s, maybe. I will now talk to you a bit more about the genesis of the magazine. So says our website, Terremoto is a unique print and online magazine about contemporary art in both Latin and North America. Present physically and for free at a print run of 20,000 copies in more than 25 Pan-American countries through an ingenious peer-to-peer system of distribution, as well as in Europe in selected bookstores, subject to blockade possibilities. We deliver first-hand documentation and challenging art critique to our audience of dedicated professionals and art students. Since its inception, Terremoto ambitions to be the voice of cosmopolitan Pan-American art practitioners as much interested in forms and aesthetics as an in theory, literature and politics, with a strong focus on the local problematics of our continent. To do so, Terremoto is fully bilingual in English and Spanish. Financed by an ambitious mixed model of commercial activity and philanthropy, Terremoto is a publication of reference in both Americas. To my knowledge, when it was created, it was quite unique in its kind, and since that, due to many contextual factors, we have the pleasure to count with many more bilingual quality art publications. Although we happen to be the oldest these days, exception made of the Colombian art nexus that you can see here. Created in 2013, the magazine was initially a blog. It was inspired by formats such as the late contemporary art daily, which bankrupted with the late post-internet movement in 2020. This format had been essential. It was also a free way to publish content, as I started the magazine with almost no money and allowed many actors to connect one with another and even be aware of each other's presence. Facebook is not a media, as you know. Since its publication in paper in 2015, we published 3 issues a year. A restriction of paper for medias later made us keep that way. So since its inception, the idea of Terremoto was a free magazine. So here are some copies. Basically, we based on this strategy to have this free magazine was based on the observation that on a continent presenting so many social disparities, it was absurd to ask art students and young art practitioners to pay $15 US, $100 of our times, for a magazine. That intuition led us to success and also throve on the idea that if we offered the magazine for free, it could then be distributed on a free will basis by art organizations which didn't have a commercial structure to sell books, but rather great audiences, galleries, nonprofit, foundations, schools, and so on. We would give copies to museums for their staff. Of course, one could say that these places aren't per se democratic, and we know that. But nothing is perfect, right? And we thought at the time this gratuity was better than nothing and allowed us to reach a wider audience, which we think we did. Our editorial line has been since a mix of text and visual contributions of different natures that has been, I think, reflecting the constantly moving nature of art in the last 30 years. An intertwining of various knowledges, art critic, anthropology, philosophy, semiology, science, art history, with other genres like fiction or journalistic interview, or other fields of cultural production like cinema, dance, architecture, or design, mixed with, at the time, an innovative and contemporary, almost pop design that let go on the quite caricatural categories that was Latin American art, seen from a Western perspective. A tool for our own curiosity towards each other, I guess, an accompanier of the continent's hope for political change. I guess throughout the years, we contributed outlining the artist, as we once entitled one of our issues as a wild investigator, quoting a Roberto Bolaño book, as you noticed. And the art writer as a sort of talented pithy, a collagist, exegesis, not so rigorous as inspired, as hopeful and ironic than sometimes deeply dejected. We also believe we were always conscious that culture was a counterpower to rigid classist, racist, sexist classifications. Remember, I come from feminism with my first fanzine, Petunia, if you remember. It's a long time ago. We were not blind nor cynical, but rather we sought to engage in a sort of weird, naive, realpolitik, like entrepreneurial way of producing action as an answer to context. I'm aware that these projects couldn't have been born anyways without a dose of stupidity and superiority on my side. A French woman lost in the middle of the Americas, privilege stuck on my face like the thick French accent I could never get rid of all these years. The importance, though, has always been to bear the indisputable strength to work locally and to build a generous tool for others to fill in with their ideas, dreams, and claims. Something I think all throughout the years we never lost sight of, explaining proudly the strong fidelity of our public, never contradicted. The publishing house, Loras Ediciones. So, the publishing house has built across the years the heart of what we do at Terremoto, believing that in our times of hyper-fast circulation and ultra exposure to images, and also, of course, the increasing toll and custom barriers on foreign HTTPs is probably slowly putting an end to that. The book, the paper one, as both an object and an idolatrous relationship to text and images, was going to keep being extremely needed, but on totally different premises than it had been in the 20th century. So the content of art books, you know. In contemporary art, catalogs are basically luxury brochures that have few commercial value, especially for young artists. What's important is to make them circulate to the right professionals. Catalogs of group exhibitions are for the memory, and only large institutions or rich galleries can afford to produce them. Theory books are somehow different. Less costly to produce, they are likely to become a surprising commercial hit. The Louis Kamnitzer book we released at our debut, for instance, brought a quite substantial income to the company. And even so, it was only distributed in Mexico, USA, Canada, and Europe, and only in Spanish. In Mexico alone, we sold 5,000 copies, which was a lot at the time. And remember, no one thought that Mexico would become a part of the 10 largest economy worldwide at the time. It seemed no sense. The decision to make books for art galleries and museums wishing to outsource the fabrication and distribution of their books to us after large major funding cuts due to US recession that started during the Trump years, rest in peace, or should I say madness, made totally sense regarding the area of competency we had developed on a bilingual level with the magazine since already a few years. Remember that in 2015, even Harvard was not able to produce Spanish-English bilingual publications from an operational point of view. Do you remember Mousse, this Italian magazine of the 2000s? It bankrupted 10 years ago because of the war, but their model for me was decidedly an inspiration. Italian publishing has been vanguard, in my opinion, in the 20th century. Temblores now publishes almost 100 titles a year, and we do restrict our production to that amount of titles only because it's a personal decision to keep it manageable. For more information, please visit our catalog app for the full list of titles. I would like to talk to you now about distribution because it's the nerves of the war here. From the start, Terremoto was relying on a smart peer-to-peer system of distribution. We would exchange favors of people traveling in the USLA, carrying the mag in their luggage in exchange of publicity for their art gallery, non-profit, etc. It was working quite well, but it was very aleatory and artisanal. At the same time, airline luggage transports app was starting, like Grabber, but no one was willing to transport such weird and heavy packages, not even talking about the drugs problem, now gone with full legalization 5 years ago, hallelujah. I also noticed that many art friends were always looking for transport favors on Facebook and so on. So when I met this funny collector and tech business angel, anonymity required, during Pacific Standard Time in Los Angeles in 2017, willing to invest quite a lot of money into the project, I decided to launch our own transport app. You know the rest. ArtCase is now the #1 art transport app in the USA and Canada, and gaining markets in Europe and North Africa actually, as the war collapsed existing carrier systems as well as regular mail. Ironically, the American continent has now such a great system of post, although still relatively expensive for small packages like envelopes, since FedEx had been nationalized, that we ourselves use ArtCase only in specific occasions. But at the time, it was a magical solution, and besides of making us quite sustainable, made our whole system much more reliable, as much for the magazines and for the book distribution. An idea that actually also revolutionized quite much the art books business has been our gift box. Thinking that offering for free all our yearly publication in a box, as long as the reader would cover shipments, was quite a thing. Of course, it was an offer proposed to professionals who could justify a strong link to art. Amateurs who really explained their interests were actually never left out of the program. We now have more than 1,000 subscribers to our gift box across the Americas. Unfortunately, this offer isn't available to other destinations, as you know. At Temblores, we've always been very careful to privilege and propose a global approach. Even it's a term of the 90s, but I think it does quite the job. But this local approach was a key to our success, I think. And although for long we had to justify our relative exclusion of the once predominant Western market, Not covering New York City and the north of the eastern part of the US, for instance, was at first considered as a stupidity and almost a scandal. But to come back to the gift box, well, of course, the entirety of our catalog was an option when we kept it relatively small, but from 2020 on, it was not possible anymore. So we then kept the offer proposing people to select 12 books a year, 10 art catalogs, 2 theory books, that would be sent for free. We, of course, selected a list of renowned curators and art professionals to whom we proposed a subscription, and to our surprise, many of them accepted, making our distribution network even more valuable for museums and galleries who were then sure that these VIPs would see their books. In the next year, well, it became a craze, and we even had to refuse projects. Nice anyway, as paper shortage came into the picture lately, we had a strong enough reputation to keep our publishing license, as you know. Retail distribution, you know about, right? Amazon, drones, restriction on bookstore retail due to paper shortage, etc. Won't lecture you students, post-digital native, about boring, evident crap like that. I will talk to you about the space now. The space is interesting as it kind of revives some idea of art total from a century ago. Here's curators. This is maybe where the Berlin analogy comes to life. Still kidding. Since 2016, we had a small office in a mixed economy, small cultural complex in Mexico City Center, close to Colonia Juarez, known as Edificio Humboldt. You can see it here. In this space, we had our office, a bookshop in conjunction with Moto Distribution from Berlin, a small exhibition space of around 200 square feet. Here you can see a performance of Julien Creuset. In 2020, we got the opportunity to buy a whole building in Centro. So to the existing activities, we added a residency space, 2 rooms and a studio, a library. Due to paper restrictions, retail had been made more and more difficult, and also we decided to later offer space to the original historic Moto stock after they were forced to move in catastrophe during the Berlin siege in 2029. So here is their former shop in Berlin. An educational department, and a bar nightclub. I know, right? 57 is still a clubber. Of course, a space like Flora in Bogota, as its debut, is an inspiration. Also, La Colonie in Paris, the mythical experimental project of artist Kader Attia, which was supposed at its beginning to be an art center funded by a bar, nightclub, whose conception I was actually involved in at its beginning. So this proposal was not so revolutionary per se economically, but it was visionary about the intuition of growing, in the context of growing racial tensions due to multiculturalism in Paris at the time, and alas, when the city lost its autonomy in 2030, the project vanished for obvious reasons. So I'm going to talk to you about the educational program now. Here is a artist gala prize scheme. So I wonder if the operation of various postgraduate programs in the field of visual arts in Latin America was a reaction to the almost monopoly of mostly private MFA system in the West during the mid-10s. SOMA in Mexico City, Capacech in Rio de Janeiro, Flora in Bogota. So here you can see SOMA in Mexico. So in Mexico, having to our disposal at Terremoto a building and a public program on the way, it felt soon quite logical to venture into education with the whole Temblores project, having as a resource, a library and some room to receive people. We have now a full-time curator, project manager, taking care of the exhibition program, still an open call to a few exceptions, the public program that she curates in conjunction with the main editor, as well as the education partnership, mainly partnership with foreign universities and similar programs. We also offer art classes for amateurs as well as students from middle to high school of selected and privileged establishments of the vicinity. The art classes are offered by young artists and independent academic researchers of Mexico City. We're then able to provide some decent income to young artists for them to sustain their career until they achieve financial success or at least balance in their own practice, as well as to independent academics who wish to remain freelance but often face terrible precariousness. This small exhibition and educational center that exists in our building is then funded by the Temblores Foundation. It was created in 2022 after we achieved economic independence thanks to the publishing activities in order to redirect the philanthropic donations occurring through the board in place since 2017. This board originally served as a guarantee of the magazine's activity in the first uncertain years. The foundation also gives modest scholarships to workshop participants and residency participants, as well as small co-production budget on local projects. I will close this talk by mentioning this brand new project of Loras that ventures surprisingly outside of the Americas. And you know how focusing there has been the motto of all our activities since our beginnings. I said that several times. So a very long time ago, I had a discussion in Brazil with one of the editors of ArtReview, a British magazine. We were presenting Terremoto there, and he was attending the opening of a friend. We were having lunch in Rio, and he was talking on ArtReview's extension towards Asia, apparently for economic reasons. I suggested that due to historical reasons, wouldn't it make more sense to expand towards India, which had also a thriving art scene and at the time and was maybe more linked conceptually to British art than Chinese one. He was kind of taken aback by my answer, like if I had said some incongruity. He then added with a small laugh that, for instance, they didn't cover Australia, although he was speaking the same language and that apparently it composed a big chunk of their readers, according to their stats. I meditated much about what seemed to me as a cultural nonsense, wondering about what could one consider being an international art magazine. What the word international was supposed to mean there, not even talking about Frieze, which at the time I used to write for them, simply handled the international side of things by, for the review system, simply splitting the world in 5 equal continents, getting 10 reviews each per issue, exception made of Europe considered as double, and New York and London as countries per se. So, after the piece was made in Europe last year, and that there is everything to rebuild, including culture, I thought that it was maybe time for me to come back with a project. I had realized throughout the years that one of Terremoto's main interests was its use of Spanish as an Esperanto-like element, able to bring together people of quite distinct identities and backgrounds through language, albeit of imperialist origins, which later became surprisingly part of some counterculture. For instance, in the USA at the beginning of the century, where it was the language of the poor and the immigrant. Thinking of this and the conversation with the ArtReview editor, I then thought, it's an ad I saw in Paris airport. On top of everything, I speak French. It's an ad for speaking French. But don't do it, it's useless. So thinking of this conversation with the ArtReview editor, I then thought that the idea of a French art magazine, which had always repulsed me, could actually come to life through its language. No, you can speak French, it's okay. Through its language, uniting a broad range of countries which have an historical link to France, or still use its language. The magazine would then explore art and culture in France, Belgium, Luxembourg, or Canada, but also Maghreb and West Africa, Lebanon and Syria, the Caribbean, New Caledonia and the Reunion, Vietnam, Laos, but also Louisiana or Guyana, and so many others. Affirming history and language not as rigid tools of power, but rather flexible vocabulary that can be thrown as bridges between geographies and territories. This magazine would not only talk about art, but also literature and music, 2 strong fields of creation in Francophone countries. Funny detail. The destruction with the war of almost all pre-existing mail and postal systems would bring me back to the first Terremoto times when I was traveling the world, breaking my back, carrying suitcases of magazines throughout the Americas for almost 4 years. History is definitely a cycle. Well, thank you for your attention. Okay, so I guess you you understood, I guess, that this conference is a funny dystopical conference, talking to you from the future. some things of this conference actually already exist. Some of them know. The club part, I'm still working on that. And I got this idea. We've been talking about science fiction, right, earlier. I had this idea because people were like asking me to make presentation of Terremoto, and I thought it was just so horribly boring to like make your PowerPoint talking about our strategy and content. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's a magazine. You just read the magazine, or you just don't read the magazine, probably. But I still thought it was funny, and it also like allows me to kind of talk about like a possible world I could imagine and I can fantasize. The other day I was in Marfa and I was like talking about Marfa, and I was saying, oh, thank you Marfa people to welcome me here. I'm so glad to be in Mexico again. As you know, like that now Texas is back to Mexico, and like the Texas guys they were like looking at each other like, what the fuck, you know. Or I was in New York giving the talk, and then I was at the ICI, and I was being like, oh, thank you for having me, it's great to be here, after the city was like destroyed for 10 years by Hurricane Patty, and they were like, oh, what, you know, like, and but they were happy to know that Trump Tower had collapsed, so that was okay. And you know, so it's kind of funny because you kind of move around into geographies and kind of imagine how like the world could have changed, because obviously Terremoto is definitely a project that kind of talks about like unbalance of powers, you know, like wondering why here you have this magazine called Art in America, and it just talks about New York mainly. Like, don't understand very well what they're still thinking about. You know what I mean? Like, so you know, even the name, you know, United States of America. There, you know what I mean? Like, first, you know what I mean? The Americas, America. So, you know what I mean? Like, all these kind of language things also, they're kind of changing, right? Even the term Pan-American, which I like to use. You know, it's a term invented by the CIA. Why couldn't I just like appropriate it nowadays and make it cool? You know what I mean? Like, and decide Pan-Americanism does exist. You know what I mean? Like, it's all about like all this appropriation and kind of projecting. And also I'm French, so I have no idea what I'm talking about, so I can probably like just invent geography. Also, we invented most of the stupid line you can see drawn on maps every day. If you like Google Maps, like I do a lot. And also, yes, I was also inspired by another book named Crude, and I'm so nasty. I think Sally Hoffman is the author, a British curator, and it's a funny like dystopian book taking place in the future, where in a country named Academy, where actually like curators and academics rule the world. So this is like the highest job you can be, is to be a curator, and you just like go around giving talks and like talking to people and like writing texts and doing studio visits. And it's kind of funny book. It's called Crude because it talks about oil. Also, so I was thinking about this like whole contemporary art dystopia, you know, and like and I was like, wow, like this is cool. I want to be part of this dystopia too, because like the present is so boring. Not all the time. So yes. Do you have any comments or questions?
I was going to start by asking what year it was before the...
That's for recording reasons, right?
But maybe instead of asking what year it is, I'll ask, like, thinking about audience actually seems more important. Like, it used to be, I think, a boring conversation audience, but maybe after the war, as you would say, it's become more interesting to think about audience. And I'm just thinking about who you're thinking about when you're producing the magazine or where you're making the projects down in Mexico City.
Well, the fact that we produce in both Spanish and English kind of informs on a specific ambition for that, in the sense that first and foremost, in a way, we produce for the people of the Americas that we distribute the magazine to. So basically, that's Mexico, Central America, Latin America, the Caribbean, and a large part of the United States, which is not the northeastern part. Like, not New York, but we actually do West Coast. Like, I brought lots of magazines here. I've been sending magazines to Portland before, for instance. maybe you haven't found them, but they were here at some point. You know, we distribute in Denver, in San Francisco, in New Orleans, in Texas, in Colorado. It's been in Oklahoma. It's been in Arkansas. You know what I mean? In Florida, in South Carolina. So obviously, it's also there are also places where you could find also like Latino community, right? So basically, and of course, English-speaking community, right? So basically, like the idea is really like with this translation project, because most of our content is bilingual, 90% I'd say. So basically, the idea is really like to be an incentive to improve knowledge of each other, because there is really a feeling also within Latin America and all the Spanish-speaking zones that it's kind of hard for each other to kind of know what the other practitioners are doing. You know what I mean? Like people in Peru don't necessarily know who are the artists from Chile, although they're very close, you know what I mean? Like people in Brazil have no idea sometimes what's happening in Mexico. People in the Caribbean, it's very insular, so sometimes you know what I mean? Like you're just the closest island, and people in between Puerto Rico and Cuba, if they wouldn't be terremotos, they wouldn't know what the other people are doing. And I'm not even talking about you guys, you know what I mean? Like, do you know what's going on in Latin America? You know what I mean? Like people didn't know there was like a peace process in Colombia, you know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like, so there is like a general isolationism, which I of course like project on, but not only. It's kind of, I think it's historically true, and also I'm coming from Europe. I'm a pure product of like Europe political and cultural projects that was engaged after World War II. Basically, like generation of like my parents and grandparents decided to make Europe more as a cultural constriction, so we talk to each other despite the fact we're all speaking different languages, which is not the case in the Americas, which makes things pretty much easier. Like Europe is a political constriction where like free trade, free circulation of people, free circulation of content is made to actually that this kind of war doesn't happen anymore. And then I grew up going to this other country and trying to learn about the other country and like going in Erasmus exchange. It's a political will. If your governments don't want to have this to happen to you, to know your neighbors, to know more about them, it's not going to happen. It has to be financed, it has to be promoted. It has to be political will to know your neighbors. And a lot of people in the Americas never had an interest for anyone to know their neighbors, despite of the language one more time, you know what I mean? Like, because it's kind of, for me, it was surprising. I came to the Americas, oh my God, amazing, they speak 2 languages. We speak 15, like, everyone's talking to each other. No, it was not really the case. So I guess first and foremost, Terremoto is for these people. But I also know that we became a very comprehensive source of understanding of what's going on in this zone for New Yorkers and people in Europe, because we publish in Spanish and English, and we're fully available online. Because Terremoto is actually distributed not to 20,000 copies, but 5,000 copies for free in all the zone I was telling you before, and it's a huge amount of work. But in Europe, we're distributed with cost. But yes, we became also, I think, like a big visibility, big vitrine for a foreign public, right? For especially the Europe market, which didn't really understand what was going on in Latin America, or maybe even in the Chicanx part of the United States, or even in the Afro-American, because we also been trying to actually in the States, we've also been trying to publish like things about like Afro-American community, Chicanx community, also First Nation, blah, because it's kind of also like it's something we do in Latin, like in the more Latin American part. We've been talking a lot about like climate change, indigenous communities, because artists there talk about this. This is major concern in their work. So we've been also trying to tie the dots together with artists in the United States who have lesser visibility in mainstream art media, but who are actually like working on these questions. And as this question interests us from the Latin American perspective, we've been trying to basically throw bridges. Like for instance, the last issue you've been seeing, which was our 10th issue, Falluqueros. It was produced in the context of Pacific Standard Time, and so it's explicitly featuring content about the LA Chicanx community. and Mexican American community in relationship to other countries in Latin America around the idea of smuggling, because in colloquial Mexican, la fayuca is like the pirate products that Mexican people would bring back from Americas in the 90s before NAFTA. So it would be maybe candies or like polo shirts, or, so you see Mexican people with their big bags and they're bringing things to Mexico, so that's the fayuca, right? So and then after 94, it would be, la fayuca would be the pirate version of this product produced in Mexico, fake Nikes, fake, fake music, like copies of Hollywood films, all this kind of piracy. So there is this idea of like this kind of mutant product, right? So, and the fayuqueros, there are the people who are organizing the distribution of these products, right? So the idea of the title fayuqueros, with an X, was the idea that we're all also smugglers. And we're not only smugglers of merchandises, we're also smugglers of significance, of identities, of different things. We're never one thing or the other. We're always, our identities, especially in the Americas, are composed of multiple identities. We're all carrying these different things. And so Fayuqueros, he was really, thriving on this very specific Mexican American colloquial vocabulary. But of course, in the magazine, in this issue, you will find also a lot of like other occurrences within Latin America of different articles talking about smuggling. For instance, we have a great article about Tropicalia, the Brazilian arts and music movement. Which anniversary was actually this year. It was the 50 years of Tropicalia, and it's a very interesting example of smuggling specific values in Brazil's dictatorship culture of the time, values of tolerance, of like gender bending, race, class ascension, that didn't exist. That were hardly visible in pop culture in Brazil, in popular culture, and all of a sudden there were all these like crazy people on TV, like it was just it didn't exist before. So that was also smuggling of a sort. So this is the kind of thing we do, like at Terremoto, we're already trying to like kind of map things and generate different dialogues. So it's also why we keep working with this kind of old-fashioned way of having a topic per issue. That's so out of fashion somehow. But yeah, so I guess like our audience is basically like everyone who's interested in what we do. And on the website you have much more content that is not printed, because the printed magazine is definitely a goodie for fetishists. I'm a fetishist of books. You probably are too. Yes, I guess that answers your question. You're welcome.
Who wants the mic?
It's not to sing a song, huh? Don't worry. Well.
So I have a question.
Okay.
What is the editorial process like to choose what goes in and what stays out?
It's so the magazine part, so the printed part here. So it's 3 issues a year with like 12 articles. They're all commissioned. We don't really have subscriptions. I mean, it could happen that many people write to us and they're like, I want to submit something. And we're like, yeah, most of the time. But sometimes they're recommended by someone, and we of course read what they propose, but as it's organized around thematics, it's, like if you submit something, most of the time you have no idea what we're working on, so we're probably not going to submit anything that's in relationship to what we do. So it's not happening. But so it's mostly us. So we're brainstorming several months in advance. And then we're doing research with my editor, Diego del Valle Rios, who I thank here so much. Thank you very much, Diego, for this work. And then we're kind of talking to friends. We've been reading stuff. We're Facebooking like crazy, especially Diego, because I hate Facebook. And we're checking things out. And you know what I mean? Like it's an intense prospection process. And it all stems a lot from the blog section, because the blog section, basically, I was making fun of Contour Art Daily, but it's actually a good format. And the magazine started as a blog 4 years ago, so since this moment, we probably published more than 1,200 shows in all the Americas. It's a huge archive. And so basically, to publish every day a blog post, it allows us to kind of know, like, know these new places, new artists, new curators, new statement, new writers, you know what I mean? Like, so it's kind of, it's an organic network. Also, look, asking people, like, to, like, bring these magazines everywhere, because, like, yes, we ship some stuff, but, like, for some destination, it's not even, like, it's 2 boxes I send to Peru through mail. I'm just going to take a plane, like, next months, because it's not working, you know what I mean? Like, so it's, so it's very organic, basically, like, and, but the thematic, of course, sometimes it also, like, come from an observation, right, or a specific circumstance. For instance, Pacific Standard Time, that was something we knew from a long time, and actually there is another project that's on the table here. There's just one copy, actually. It's like the Los Angeles Art Fair. They invited us to, like, co-curate their reader of this edition of the fair. So it's been also another commissioning process. We suggested a theme, which was soñadores, dreamers. Voilà. So it was about this idea, right? Like, so it was the idea of the dream, etc. And of course, it was the context of, like, the abrogation of the DACA, and etc., etc. And so the reader commissioned half of the text to their writer about these ideas, and we commissioned the other part. So yeah, we like to work around a theme, and after it's always, like, a bit like it's very loose, you know what I mean? Like, at the end of the day, like, like the articles, it's like curating. Like, the articles are not made to illustrate, like, the point of, like, the editorial letter. Like, no, it doesn't illustrate. You know what I mean? Like, it's more like our fantasy, and, you know what I mean? Like, it's like when you're a curator, you're, like, pitching your fantasy to the artist, and you're like, hey, I hired you for this. And most of the time, the artist is like, me? Why? You know what I mean? And then after, he does a work that has nothing to do with what you thought. And then finally, they all together in the room, and they look amazing together, and it's exactly what you thought. And you don't know how that happened, and nothing is illustrated. I mean, this is when it's a good show, but, like, when you're a good creator, but or a good publisher somehow, But and after, everything kind of fall back on its feet, like a cat that you throw by the window, but you don't really know. You know what I mean? Like, you kind of leave, give agency. Like, topics are not, it's like our realism topic, you know what I mean? Like, it's both so specific, you want to hang yourself reading it, and then after it's everything, right? So it's just about the amount, it's like the white cube, it's a convention, like, how creative, how elastic can you be with this format? Can be rigid and funny at the same time, probably. Oh, there's another question there. Aaron, funny.
Thank you. How often do you publish the magazine?
It's 3 times a year for the print version.
Okay, I just was curious about that.
Yeah, it's a lot, because this stuff is really going to a snail pace. Like in Santiago de Chile, Rosario in Argentina, Barranquilla on the Colombian coast, goes to Medellin, goes to sometimes Brasilia, it goes to Denver, it goes to Guatemala City, sometimes it arrives in Cuba, sometimes in Guadeloupe. It's you know what I mean? Like, so, you know what I mean? I don't just do a FedEx, like, it's a, so even 4 months, you know what I mean? Like, sometimes the last box, it arrives 3 months later. So it's also nice to have a longer temporality. Plus, these articles are very complicated and boring, and you're going to take 3 months to read them. Put them in the toilets is a place where you have more concentration to practice your Spanish. Yeah, but the blog is daily, for instance, on the website. The blog is every day you have a new blog post. Reviews, we've been publishing 1 review a week, but that was way too much because my staff would go crazy because they're long reviews, they're not like critic picks, like 200 works copy paste from the press release. So they're like 1,200 to 1,500 words. They're building, so this is every 2 weeks. We also have like the some reports about art fairs. We have like Marginalia project, which is basically every month we commission to an artist the background images of the website, and we also publish them on the Instagram. So so this all like the site design change. So every month at the end of the month we publish the slideshow of the photos that the artist has been publishing, and we say who that was, etc. Like there are a lot of like smaller things. So every day on the page you will have new content, but the printed issue is only three a year. I would probably slide my wrist otherwise.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dorothea. I just wanted to make a quick, to point out a new project that we've just realized, and so you're welcome to also take home a poster for the Low-Residency MFA is commissioned posters to some artists. And the first ones are Henrik Playing Jakobsen from Copenhagen, and Mauro Cerqueira from Porto, Portugal, and Noor Abed from Palestine. So they're free in the spirit of giving away stuff for labor for free. But thanks so much.